Grüezi ragazzi, welcome e bienvenue to Cannabis Scienza's LinkedIn Live event for today with many more on the way. To those of you joining us live, thank you very much for being here with us. And for those of you checking out the recording at a later point in time, thank you very much for giving it a look. We hope that you enjoy it and that you perhaps leave the session having learned something new today. Quick intro about Cannabis Scienza. Cannabis Scienza aims to combat the bottlenecks of the medical cannabis industry using the power of education and through the training of healthcare professionals on the effective use of cannabinoid medicines. If you haven't already, please head over to our LinkedIn page, give us a follow. If you enjoy the live today, give us a like. Please don't be shy, don't hold back your questions either. And on today's session, we'll be discussing the role of medical cannabis in the treatment of Alzheimer's. Joining us on our call today is Fabrizio Pamploma, and I will hand it off now to Cannabis Scienza CSO, Fabio Turco, to take the reins from here and also to give Fabio the opportunity to introduce himself. Thank you very much for being with us today, Fabio.
Okay.
Fabio. Sorry.
Okay, thank you, Bijan. Good afternoon to you all, and welcome back to Cannabis Sciences live on LinkedIn. Those who followed our past events already know that we cover a different aspect of medical cannabis each week, whether it be the plant's botanical aspect, its use, the pathologies where it proved beneficial, the cannabinoid system, the legal framework, and so on. Today, we will discuss about the use of medical cannabis in the treatment of Alzheimer patients. You know, Alzheimer's is classified among the neurodegenerative diseases. It's kind of dementia that affects memory, thinking, and behavior. The most common early symptom is difficulty in remembering recent events, and as the disease progresses, symptoms can include problems with language, disorientation, mood swings, behavioral issues, and the complete loss of memory. Gradually, bodily function are lost, ultimately leading to death. Although the speed of progression can vary, the typical life expectancy following diagnosis is 3 to 9 years. As reported, there are approximately 50 million people worldwide with Alzheimer's disease. It most often begins in people over 65 years of age, and it's more common in women than in men. But before starting to talk about medical cannabis and Alzheimer's, let's take a closer look at our guest today, Fabrizio Pamplona. So, Fabrizio, according to your LinkedIn profile, you are a neuroscientist and an entrepreneur. Could you please tell us a little bit more about yourself and your background? And welcome to Cannabis Scienza Live.
Sure, Fabio. First of all, it's a pleasure and an honor to be here. Thank you for the invitation. And it's always nice to figure out backwards your career in the LinkedIn, right? You can say many things, you can leave a lot of things, but in the bottom line, you need to summarize yourself in a short sentence. And for me, it's scientist and entrepreneur. Why? Because when I finished the PhD, instead of following on in an academic pathway, I decided to enter or to see opportunities in the private sector. And then more than anything else, I joined groups of companies that were starting, startups. I founded startups already, or I joined companies really at the beginning, as we say, the founding group. And this has become really my life. Even inside big companies. I had like 5 years as a neuroscientist in the biggest health company in South America. I was hired to create new projects, to create new ventures. So that's basically what I learned to do since my PhD in 2010. So it's already 12 years of being an entrepreneur on top of 10 years of being a scientist. So that's why I call myself this way.
Okay, that's interesting. Thank you. So you come from Brazil, you are in Brazil. So we can take the opportunity to talk a little bit about the cannabis situation in Brazil. What is the legal status of medical cannabis in Brazil? And what are the challenges associated with making science and enterprise as you do related to cannabis and cannabinoids in Brazil?
Just this question, I think it would deserve a whole live, like a whole hour to.
Yeah, I know.
But trying to be, straight to the point. First thing, not many people, even in the country, knows that the use of medicinal cannabis is allowed in Brazil. Sometimes the discussion with lay people, or even badly informed physicians, doctors, they start by teaching them this, that yeah, you can use medical cannabis in Brazil in a totally legal way. And this legal framework, the initial one, dates back to 2016. So it's already 6 years that people have some access to medical cannabis in the country. Of course, it always started with imported medicines, or even most of them coming from US at that point, as food supplements, and entering Brazil as a kind of a gray area, an unknown classification of products. And it evolved quickly to 2019, being recognized as CBD derivatives, or medical cannabis products, if I in a free translation. So the true recognition of medical cannabis as a specific classic of products dates back to 2019, and then 21 it's allowed. The production is allowed in Brazil. Cultivation is not allowed yet. There's a lot of people and associations cultivating with I don't know the proper name in English. It's like liminar in Portuguese. It's like a pre-authorization of the judge. So it's let's say kind of a legal gray area in terms of the law, but they have the authorization from from lawsuits, something like that. If I could explain myself. And now the challenges are two. So first, or three for the companies. First, you can produce, but you cannot cultivate. So you still need to import and rely on imported APIs or extracts. But both, that's something interesting. Both isolated compounds and standardized extracts are acceptable under the current regulation. But it must be to the pharmaceutical level, to be produced in Brazil. Now, for the imported goods, they are still imported through a compassionate use regulation. So they don't need to be strictly pharmaceutical. They could be food grade or whatever kind of product in the country of origin, and they are imported in a named patient program (NPP). So it means that that prescription allows that particular product to be imported for that particular patient. So that brings a lot of restrictions to the distribution, in the volume of the market. So not many people have access, to cannabis, or we cannot reach a lot of people through this mechanism. Although it's a very popular one and relatively used because it's a facilitated tracking in Anvisa, in the regulatory agency. So either importing or fabricating in Brazil, you need a prescription, of course. And then the third way is to produce yourself, like cultivating the association or at home, which is not totally legal, but some people have access through this route, as I mentioned, through lawsuits. So these are the three. And of course, epileptic patients are still very popular, but the vast majority, I would say, but the range of use for medical cannabis is expanding a lot in Brazil, including the topic of today, Alzheimer's disease.
Okay. Thank you for this explanation. It seems a little bit complicated, the situation in Brazil, but let's hope that things will change in the future with more openness in your country.
Adding something more straightforward, you don't find CBD in CBD stores. Let's say there's no medical cannabis stores. That's one thing. But you do find some CBD products in the pharmacy already under prescription as a controlled substance. That's more or
Okay,
less.
but they need to be imported from abroad. They cannot be produced in Brazil, right?
Yeah, at least this tracked and the
Okay.
API must be imported.
Okay. So coming back to our topic, the disease we are discussing, Alzheimer, is a neurodegenerative condition that causes the loss of neurons, especially cholinergic neurons. The etiology of the disease is poorly understood, but we know that the disease process is largely associated with amyloid plaques, neurofibrillary tangles, and loss of neuronal connection in the brain. Moreover, loss of immune homeostasis and aberrant inflammatory responses seem to be involved. Is there also a role for the endocannabinoid system in the progression or initiation of the pathology?
That's a very interesting question. I've been dedicated to this topic for quite some time already in the last years, and the role of the endocannabinoid system is dual, I would say. Some people already discover that, for the progression of the disease, let's say when the synapses start to be encapsulated and cut off, let's put this way, or to weakening the synapses, there is some involvement of the endocannabinoid system. So that was the beginning of the knowledge. Now, as the science around that evolved, I would say that before this whole neurodegenerative process happened, the role of the endocannabinoid system is rather the opposite. It's a protective one. So right now, what we know is that in humans and in models, both cellular models and animal models, is that the tonus of the endocannabinoid system protects against the toxicity of the beta amyloid aggregates, or even the oligomers, the soluble parts. If this is true, it means that the toxicity of the A beta fragments it's lower under the presence of the endocannabinoids. So that's one thing. For the human situation, it looks like the tonus of the endocannabinoid starts to drop after the age of 50, when let's say 50, 60, when the symptoms typically tends to affect people, those who are genetically prone to develop Alzheimer's disease. So there is some kind of anti-correlation between occurrence of symptoms and decrease of the endocannabinoid system. If you think about the effects of the endocannabinoid system against the toxicity of the A beta amyloids, we could think of the antioxidant properties, the anti-inflammatory properties, reduction in activation of microglial cells, and really a neuroprotection against calcium-induced neuronal activation, so acetotoxicity. There are quite some redundant ways on how endocannabinoids may protect the neurons against the toxicity, both involving cellular roles, as I mentioned, in microglia, and direct effects on the neurons as the protection against the acetotoxicity. Now, the question is, how do we raise and sustain endocannabinoids throughout the life and protects people against development of such diseases?
So maybe this is the situation where medical cannabis can be useful, because we know that there are no medication supplements that have been shown to decrease the risk of Alzheimer. Moreover, no treatment stop or reverse its progression, even if some intervention may temporarily improve symptoms, such as physical and cognitive exercises, psychosocial intervention, and also the use of anticholinergic drugs. So do you think medical cannabis can be a useful treatment for Alzheimer patients?
Yeah, you're totally right. I mean, there's no, as we say, disease-modifying treatment in Alzheimer's so far, so there's no kind of cure. And the anticholinergic drugs, they help to some extent on the cognitive aspects, but they don't last forever. Eventually the cognition drops again. So I think we need to work on or to consider different classes of drugs, not only counteract symptoms, and that's precisely when the endocannabinoids and the medical cannabis may come in place, because instead of kind of acting on a as a pro-cognitive drug, counteracting just the symptom. I believe that the cannabinoids, they act on the cause of the disease. So, being it neuroinflammation, this oxidative stress, and more particularly by reestablishing the homeostasis. So we said that perhaps part of the cause of the Alzheimer's disease occurrence is the lack of neuroprotection, and this leads to a loss in homeostatic balance. So I believe that by adding some exogenous cannabinoids, we may eventually reestablish that, and that's a big discussion here in the country, because I'm part of a group of clinical neurology that is experimenting on people with on patients of Alzheimer's disease, and we just published one paper, and the other is being submitted. But the first one is a track record of 1 year and a half of the first patient of Alzheimer's disease in Brazil that got off diagnostic with cannabis treatment. So he's not considered as having Alzheimer's disease anymore, by at least by the clinical standards, which is unbelievable. As far as we know, there's no drug that had such results before. And this was followed by a proper placebo-controlled double-blind trial with cannabis versus placebo with appropriate controls, and the results are similar. So it looks like, yes, medical cannabis treatment may let reduce the symptoms to some extent, that people can be considered cured or something like that. It's even hard to say, because we need to observe these patients over the years, just to understand if we are kind of postponing the disease to a large extent, or we are actually rebalancing the system to the point that they won't have Alzheimer's anymore.
That's very interesting. I mean, it's very huge, because according to my knowledge, no treatment can reverse or stop the pathology. So that's very interesting discovery. But in this kind of research, are you using the whole phytocomplex, or THC alone, CBD alone, or what?
Another very, very good question. So the initial patients, we basically started to follow up on him after he starting the pharmacological treatment by himself. So it was with a product. I don't even call it a medicine, but a product that the patient found in Colombia, and he had no idea what was inside. In the label, it was written CBD, as you probably also have in Italy, or had before the regulation. People were calling CBD for a whole lot of products, even though they don't have an idea of what was inside. In this case, what was labeled as CBD was a very diluted extract, with the major composition being THC. So this patient was taking a very low dose of THC, even though he was thinking that he was taking CBD. And then we realized that by doing the proper phytochemical analysis on the product, and then under more controlled, and then we did a washout, and under more controlled circumstances, we started treating these patients with around the same dose of THC. And for the surprise of almost everyone involved, this dose was below 1 milligram of THC. So it's really in the range of microdose. Uh, this was very controversial, even though we have evidence from animal models, from mice, studies with mice showing effects of THC on neuroprotection on a really, really low dose, that some people even call it homeopathic dose. No, of course, it's just making a joke, and try not to believe on what is there. But we got the same results in humans, with this microdosing. There was just one patient, a lot of criticism. It was very complicated to publish this paper. And then we tried again in the placebo-controlled double-blind study, and again we had the same results. So it looks like a really, really low dose of THC, perhaps in the left hand of the U-shaped curve, it's the answer. So it's really like a compensation of the lack of endocannabinoid tonus. Now we may discuss whether or not this is one of the reasons why we typically see more effects in a full spectrum CBD or full spectrum extract, which is rich in CBD versus pure CBD. So it might be that THC, even in this very low range dose, does affect the brain in a positive way. That's how I think.
Yeah. Okay. So you think that it's THC, the compound that make the effects in Alzheimer? I mean,
In this
because
case, it was. Yeah, I mean, I'm not saying that CBD cannot help. It certainly does. But in this case, it was THC, and this also mimics or replicates in humans what was found in mice. In mice, they also use the THC, very low
yeah,
dose.
yeah, I understand you. You're right. That's why, as you say, that maybe this is why full spectrum CBD product works better than the pure CBD, because there are always trace amount of THC that can be considered maybe the active ingredient in some cases.
Yeah,
That's
If I may ask one question here, coming from a perspective where I know many people that have someone within their close circle of family and friends that are affected by Alzheimer's, often typically, of course, at a higher age, and there is this challenge a little bit to sometimes get that willingness from someone that's suffering from Alzheimer's to try something like cannabis to treat it as an add-on component to the treatment. May I ask, has your research come to any conclusions in terms of the effectiveness of different forms of cannabis, or if there is even a difference in the different forms? Because I'm thinking, for example, for my grandmother, I can't get her to necessarily vaporize or smoke anything, and I'm hearing also that from what you're saying, OTC products you probably don't need to bother trying because THC is the most effective molecule. So just wondering if you could maybe provide some insight there on the different forms of cannabis, if you've done any research also on that.
that's a very good question. The the way, I mean, in most of cases, people don't really have much hope in terms of the cognition of Alzheimer's patients, right? A lot of people receive the diagnostic of Alzheimer's as it was like a not a kind of a death a sentence, but a sentence that the person will live with this disease forever until he or she dies. Now, what I see is that part of Alzheimer's disease comes together with a lot of anxiety, sleep disturbance, and sometimes even some level of aggression. And at least from my experience, that's the point where the family starts to seek CBD as some answer to reduce the anxiety, to promote sleep, and to reduce aggression. In the vast majority of cases I've been seeing, that's what makes people come after CBD, and that's precisely what we typically say. Look, CBD normally improves behavior if we're expecting to promote sleep, to reduce a level of anxiety. I think this is something you eventually achieve. We don't say a lot about promoting or improving cognition, because this is not 100% clear yet, even though we do have clinical data and support by basic science. Uh, it comes more as a surprise in some cases. It doesn't work for everyone, but I can tell you that in this patient that we follow up for 1 year and a half, almost 2 years right now, and this was really almost a miracle. Now, the patient was in the beginning of the study, he was coming to the clinic together with the caretaker. So it was a like male elder, and he was going to the study together with a caretaker, and he was not totally autonomous. He was not totally able to answer the questions by himself. So a lot of the questionnaire was being filled by the caretaker, the family person who was accompanying to the clinic. After 2-3 months of treatment, this person started to show a lot more autonomy in terms of behavior, and really writing the questionnaire. And over the course of the study, he was coming alone by bus. This was a person that couldn't write, and then all of a sudden he was coming alone, writing, answering the questionnaire by himself, and totally autonomous. So one may not perhaps expect that the person will come to the normality, or will be like the same, will have the same cognition as when he was like a young, or young adult. But recovery, some level of autonomy in a patient of Alzheimer's disease, it's really almost a miracle, because these people, they tend to be eventually more and more dependent on others. So that's the level of expectation that I think it's fair to raise with people and the family, patients and the family.
Thank you.
And Fabrizio, how long the patient was diagnosed, had the diagnosis of Alzheimer's since he started the treatment with the cannabis?
This was a relatively young diagnostic, and this is very important. I think you mentioned an important point. I think it was less than 1 year, and it was a mild Alzheimer's. In the double-blind study, we needed to stratify, according to the severity of Alzheimer's disease, and the higher the severity, it looks like the less effect we had. So there's more hope for this pharmacological intervention in early diagnosed Alzheimer's disease, and up to mild severity.
Okay, just last question about the treatment scheme. How many times per day you give the patients the cannabis extract?
Initially, it was one time per day. Was really as it was taking, like a few drops, less than 1 milligram. And in the control study, we did twice a day. Total of 1 milligram twice a day. So it's really nothing. You can perceive. That's why I believe that part of the full spectrum effect may be this. I mean, typical extracts are like 20-1. Typical minimal dose, at least for the clinical practice here in Brazil, is 20 milligrams of CBD. So there you go. It's like 1 milligram of THC. Let's say if you raise to 50, 40, 60 milligrams of CBD, you still are in the very low range, like 1, 2, 3 milligrams of THC, which is totally not perceivable. I mean, you can take it, you won't make anything in terms of psychoactivity, but it's probably doing something in your brain.
May I ask one question to follow up Fabio's point there? But somebody that's suffering from Alzheimer's, that's not taking the first steps in getting their cannabis journey started by starting with some drops once a day. Is it better to administer the drops earlier in the day, or is it better to administer the drops, for instance, before going to bed, when the body is resting and the brain has more, let's say, time to recover from the day?
It just depends on the level of anxiety that the person suffers. Typically, I see doctors recommending taking the first times during the day to adapt and see how the person feels. And if there is the intention of inducing sleep and the person feel asleep, then you can take it in the evening. But this is one of the very or the many aspects that comes into individualization of medical cannabis treatments. It depends on the reactions and the intentions. Some as I mentioned, some people start taking day, and then depending on how they feel, they change to the night. I don't think there's a strict rule on that. Do you want to share some experience from Italy? Do you have rules or guidelines on this aspect?
No, because what you are telling now, it's very new for me because, as I told you, I never know about some kind of treatment that could stop or the treatment. So I don't have information about treatment scheme in Italy. Most of the patients that I read about, they use full spectrum cannabis extract, so with the higher concentration of THC compared to CBD, and not in microdosing. So for me, it's the first time. But Fabrizio, thank you very much for this information, for sharing with us your knowledge and your research about this topic. We are now at the end of our talk, so I want just to thank you again. I don't know if you want to say something to say goodbye to our audience.
I just want to thank you for the space, the interesting conversation, and I keep you guys posted as we evolved with this research. The idea of having the endocannabinoid system as the balance of the organism and therefore protecting against neurological disease is a topic that I'm dedicating myself right now and expanding. I'm not applying this only to Alzheimer's disease, but to many other diseases where medical cannabis is being positively reported. So there's still some good news to come, I believe.
Amazing. Thank you to everybody that tuned in today. For anybody that's interested in the use of cannabis in neurodegenerative diseases, and also specifically in the areas of Alzheimer, be sure to check out Fabrizio's page. He has a lot of interesting work. Just Google him and it'll come up. Fabrizio, big thank you to you. I think we need to have another one of these sessions to get an update on what you have going on. And also a very important point that you made, I think, which a lot of people don't realize, is that you may have a certain pathology, but there are all these other things that affect it as well: mood, anxiety. And so this is why I think we're fighting the good fight here, because cannabis does more than just treat the pathology, but also addresses all these other factors that improve the quality of life and impact the quality of life. So Fabrizio, thank you very much. Hope to see you soon. And for you guys watching, give us a like, give us any questions. We'll get to them. Thank you guys. Have a good day.
Goodbye. See you.
Bye.